On December 13, 1943, dawn spread over Assam, India, with a fragile golden light cutting through humid morning haze as Second Lieutenant Philip Adair prepared his P-40 for takeoff. The airfield remained eerily quiet, yet tension lingered, as ground crews hurried between revetments, checking weapons, fuel, and the fragile machinery vital for survival in these remote skies. Adair moved with practiced precision, adjusting throttle, inspecting flight instruments, and mentally rehearsing maneuvers drilled into him at Lulu Field, Arizona, far from this distant Himalayan frontier. Every action carried weight because a single misstep could compromise not only his own survival, but the safety of the entire airfield and supply chain. The P-40N Warhawk, nicknamed Lulu Belle, sat ready, its polished fuselage glinting in the weak sunlight, while subtle vibrations of the engine hinted at its raw, untamed power, promising loyalty in the imminent fight. Adair ran through the checklist methodically, noting the responsiveness of control surfaces and the tautness of cables, fully aware that mechanical failure here could be fatal, given the isolation of the base. As he taxied along the dusty runway, spirals of red-brown dust marked his path, drifting into the humid air, while birds scattered noisily from nearby jungle edges, unaware of the looming threat high above. The serene landscape deceived the senses, hiding dangers that lay beyond ridgelines and deep forest valleys, where enemy aircraft could approach without warning. Lifting gracefully into the pale morning sky, Adair felt a quiet thrill of freedom, tempered by the acute awareness that this calm was temporary, as wartime skies over Assam rarely remained peaceful. He scanned the horizon, noting wind patterns, cloud formations, and subtle movements below, every detail contributing to a mental map critical for survival against unpredictable adversaries. The valley stretched beneath him, an expanse of green canopy and scattered villages, while distant rivers glimmered like silver threads. Though beautiful, the landscape reminded him that this frontier was unforgiving, and every routine sortie carried hidden peril, as Japanese reconnaissance and bombing raids had become increasingly bold during recent months. Adair's mind focused sharply, cataloging every minor vibration, every subtle shift of air around the wings, while instincts honed over countless flight hours guided him beyond the limitations of formal training. Manuals warned against improvisation, but experience had taught him that rigid adherence could prove deadly in these volatile skies. With each passing moment, he felt both the isolation and the responsibility of being the lone airborne defender, aware that the safety of Dinjan Airfield, essential C-47 transports, and the fragile Hump supply route depended on his vigilance, skill, and judgment. The early sun intensified, casting shadows across ridges and valleys, while a faint breeze carried distant scents of wet jungle, smoke, and oil, anchoring him to the earth even as he soared above it, poised on the edge of conflict. Adair understood that the coming hours might challenge everything he had learned about flying, courage, and survival under fire. As he adjusted course over the valley, unaware of the approaching Japanese formation, a quiet tension settled over his senses, marking the fragile boundary between routine patrol and extraordinary confrontation. A line that he would cross within minutes, altering the course of his mission and cementing his place in aerial history. The quiet morning skies of Assam shattered suddenly as distant silhouettes appeared along the horizon, forming shapes unmistakable to trained eyes, signaling imminent danger. Philip Adair, scanning the vast expanse below, first assumed reconnaissance aircraft, yet their speed, formation, and coordination suggested far more deadly intent than any simple observation flight. 24 Ki-21 Sally bombers advanced steadily, their wings cutting sharply through the pale sunlight, escorted by 40 agile Ki-43 Oscar fighters, forming a deadly phalanx that promised destruction to anything in their path. Each aircraft maintained precise spacing, betraying hours of disciplined training, and the unmistakable signature of experienced pilots seeking strategic targets over the vulnerable Allied airfield below. Adair's pulse quickened as he recognized the scale of the threat. 64 enemy aircraft, vastly outnumbering his single P-40, bore down toward Dinjan with focused precision, intent on disrupting the Hump airlift vital to Chinese supply lines. The sight was overwhelming, yet years of training instilled a calm focus, suppressing fear, channeling energy into decision-making instead of panic. The bombers carried ordnance capable of devastating the runways and parked transports, while the nimble fighters promised to intercept any attempted defense with lethal accuracy. Their synchronized flight patterns designed to minimize vulnerability and maximize offensive potential. Every second counted as the formation advanced methodically, crossing the Brahmaputra Valley with strategic intent and flawless coordination. Adair knew that retreat or delay would invite annihilation. The airfield below relied on immediate response, and his experience told him hesitation would ensure catastrophic loss of men, aircraft, and supplies critical to ongoing operations. Each heartbeat reminded him of the fragility of life in combat, emphasizing how singular decisions in those skies could alter outcomes irreversibly. As he maneuvered Lulu Belle into an intercept course, the enormity of the challenge crystallized, yet instinct and technical skill combined, compelling him toward engagement rather than avoidance, a choice few pilots could comprehend under such overwhelming odds. He traced the enemy formation with sharp eyes, calculating altitude, speed, and potential weaknesses, seeking a strategy where none seemed available. The distant roar of engines grew louder as Japanese aircraft closed the final miles, creating a thunderous resonance across the valley, shaking the canopy of trees far below and alerting ground crews who struggled to process the overwhelming scale of the approaching threat. Panic could have spread quickly among unprepared personnel, but Adair's presence offered a singular, determined hope against impossible odds. He realized the enemy formation intended more than a simple bombing run. Their coordinated arrival suggested a calculated strike aimed at crippling Dinjan Airfield entirely, targeting both transports and runways to delay Allied logistics, a critical move in Japan's campaign to destabilize supply lines in the China-Burma-India theater. Every second of observation reinforced that escape was impossible. His P-40, though capable, could not outrun the disciplined mass of enemy aircraft without engaging directly. Yet confronting such overwhelming numbers required precise application of skill, courage, and improvisation beyond standard combat doctrine. Adair adjusted his approach, merging instinct with knowledge, understanding that timing, positioning, and tactical audacity represented the only viable chance to disrupt the armada, protect the airfield below, and survive the approaching storm of fire and steel that threatened to consume the Brahmaputra Valley completely. Philip Adair's grip tightened on the P-40's controls, as he closed the distance toward the advancing Sally bombers with absolute resolve, knowing hesitation could cost countless lives. Each second counted, because the bombers' payloads were capable of destroying the fragile infrastructure of Dinjan Airfield, disrupting supply lines and crippling Allied operations in the region. Lulu Belle surged forward with precise acceleration, the engine roaring defiantly, while Adair calculated attack vectors instinctively, exploiting every aerodynamic nuance to compensate for his single-plane disadvantage against 24 heavily armed bombers. The approach demanded extreme focus, as any misjudgment could allow the bombers to release ordnance effectively, creating catastrophic damage on the ground. He angled his wings deliberately, aligning his guns with the formation's trailing bombers, aiming for the engines while avoiding defensive fire from accompanying Ki-43 fighters. Every adjustment of throttle, rudder, and stick carried consequences, because the P-40's stability and speed would determine whether he survived the initial engagement unscathed. The Japanese bombers maintained tight formation, oblivious to the lone figure closing rapidly from the clouds above, while their pilots trusted coordination and numbers to neutralize any threat before it could reach critical altitude for attack. Adair's presence challenged that assumption immediately, introducing an unpredictable variable into the enemy's meticulously rehearsed approach. Tracer rounds arced through the morning light, illuminating the deadly calculus of combat, as the first rounds from his twin .50 caliber machine guns tore into the leading Sally, sending smoke curling skyward. Precision mattered because even a minor misalignment could leave him exposed to defensive fire from tail gunners, capable of severing wings or puncturing fuel tanks instantly. He weaved between incoming fire with calculated movements, employing evasive patterns drilled into him during countless training flights, yet improvising dynamically because the real combat scenario diverged sharply from any textbook maneuver. Adaptation under stress defined the difference between survival and destruction in those critical moments. Adair's single P-40 became a catalyst of chaos within the bomber formation, forcing disruption as Japanese gunners attempted to track a target smaller and faster than anticipated, causing evasive maneuvers that widened spacing and reduced bombing accuracy over Dinjan. Every second he remained in the air intensified both the danger and the potential payoff of his audacious engagement. The roar of engines, gunfire, and distant explosions merged into an overwhelming symphony of war. Yet Adair's mind remained focused on tactical application, adjusting trajectory, predicting enemy responses, and maintaining composure in a scenario designed to break even the most experienced pilots psychologically. He pressed the attack relentlessly, diving and climbing to exploit blind spots while remaining aware of approaching escort fighters, understanding that any hesitation would allow the bombers to regroup and release devastating payloads on the base below, rendering prior efforts futile. With uncanny precision, Lulu Belle struck again, her guns tearing through fuselages while smoke and flame marked successful hits, signaling that one man in a single fighter could influence an entire strategic engagement, defying expectations and demonstrating the extraordinary capacity for skill, courage, and determination under relentless aerial assault. Bullets tore through Lulu Belle's fuselage with deafening intensity, as 16 distinct impacts ripped metal and armor, shaking the P-40 violently, threatening to send it into uncontrollable spirals. Adair felt each strike reverberate through the cockpit, metal bending under fire, instruments trembling, while adrenaline surged to sharpen his awareness against imminent collapse. The control cable shivered, then snapped partially, as the right aileron jammed completely, leaving one wing unresponsive and forcing him to rely on instinctive manipulation of throttle, rudder, and trim tabs to maintain balance. Every small input required precision, because excessive movement could worsen the dive and send the aircraft into unrecoverable spins over dense jungle below. Smoke filled portions of the cockpit as punctured fuel lines leaked, mingling acrid fumes with heated engine oil, creating a suffocating environment demanding focus, resilience, and extraordinary concentration in the face of extreme danger. Adair's training had never fully prepared him for this combination of mechanical failure, enemy fire, and psychological pressure experienced simultaneously. Pain radiated through his body from concussive impacts, bruising, and minor shrapnel strikes, while the roar of engines and tracer fire created a near-constant assault on both senses and nerves, pushing human endurance to its limits during every moment of the chaotic engagement. He adjusted throttle delicately, using differential power to compensate for the jammed aileron, discovering nuanced responses of Lulu Belle previously unknown to him. A lesson in aerodynamics performed under conditions no manual could replicate safely. Each corrective action required both instinct and deep understanding of aircraft behavior under asymmetric lift and disrupted control surfaces. Adair's focus narrowed, excluding everything but the immediate challenge of survival. As Japanese fighters executed aggressive passes, attempting to exploit the crippled plane, yet he anticipated maneuvers with calculated evasions, using dive, roll, and climb judiciously despite impaired handling. The margin for error was minimal, yet refusal to abandon the aircraft reflected both courage and awareness of the stakes below. Blood from minor wounds stung his hands and face, yet he ignored pain, prioritizing the task of guiding Lulu Belle away from fatal altitudes while protecting the airfield, transports, and ongoing hump operations, each second becoming a test of endurance, skill, and resolve. The P-40 shuddered violently as another round tore through the tail, yet Adair remained composed, relying on visualization of airflow, aircraft response, and previous emergency drills, blending knowledge with real-time improvisation to keep the Warhawk airborne against impossible odds. Through smoke, vibrations, and deafening noise, he observed enemy bombers dropping ordnance indiscriminately, narrowly missing the airfield below, while his position forced Japanese pilots to adjust, inadvertently reducing destruction and saving personnel and aircraft. The realization underscored the impact of one pilot's skill against overwhelming opposition. Minutes stretched interminably as Adair continued, physically exhausted but mentally resolute, knowing any lapse in focus could lead to fatal dive or collision. Every movement, every calculation, and every decision mattered, blending instinct, experience, and audacity into a performance of survival and tactical brilliance that would echo in historical records long after the war. The nose of Lulu Belle lurched violently downward as Adair struggled against gravity, the right aileron unresponsive and rendering traditional control almost impossible in the dense, unforgiving skies of Assam. Every instinct demanded immediate bailout. Yet he fought to retain command, knowing abandoning the aircraft meant certain failure of the mission and destruction below. At 2,000 feet, the dive accelerated rapidly, Wind tearing across the fuselage with relentless force, buffeting controls, rattling instruments, and creating a terrifying cacophony of noise, vibration, and imminent danger that challenged human limits of composure and reaction. Adair relied entirely on subtle manipulations of throttle and rudder, carefully adjusting pitch and banking angle, discovering unanticipated behaviors of the damaged Warhawk. A delicate balance between aerodynamic forces and mechanical compromise that demanded absolute precision. Any miscalculation would instantly convert controlled dive into a fatal spin, leaving no opportunity for recovery over thick jungle canopy and scattered villages. The ground rushed upward with alarming speed, trees and terrain filling his peripheral vision, while smoke from ruptured fuel tanks and scorched metal blurred sight lines, forcing him to merge instinct with analytical calculation under the most extreme pressure. Each fraction of a second mattered, because even minor error could annihilate both pilot and aircraft within moments. Japanese fighters pursued relentlessly, yet the unorthodox dive forced them to adjust attack angles, providing brief, precarious openings to correct trajectory and maintain rudimentary control, demonstrating how sheer audacity, combined with deep understanding of flight dynamics, could influence the engagement dramatically. Adair recognized that normal training manuals condemned flying with severed control cables as suicide, yet experience, improvisation, and calm assessment of airflow permitted him to exploit subtle aerodynamic responses that made continued flight feasible, against all conventional expectations. Wind buffeted the canopy violently, rattling goggles and helmet as the dive continued, each second stretching into an eternity of suspended terror. Yet mental clarity remained intact, allowing him to track altitude, trajectory, and ground obstacles while plotting emergency recovery across the sprawling valley below. He calculated escape vectors with precision, banking slightly, easing throttle at exact moments, and counteracting asymmetric lift to slow descent, demonstrating extraordinary skill and knowledge that defied every pre-existing doctrine for crippled aircraft recovery, a feat that would later astound both instructors and peers alike. Lulu Belle's structure groaned under the immense stress, yet the fighter responded enough to allow incremental corrections, providing just enough control to avert collision with treetops, buildings, and the uneven ground of the Assam plains, all while enemy aircraft circled menacingly, seeking to capitalize on damage. Minutes felt like hours as Adair guided the P-40 through this lethal descent, combining instinct, technical understanding, and unyielding courage, achieving a balance between survival and mission success that redefined what was considered possible in combat aviation, leaving witnesses on the ground in disbelief at the improbable recovery. As Lulu Belle leveled from the deadly dive, Adair realized he had achieved something no manual or instructor had ever suggested. A method of flight born purely from observation, instinct, and necessity. Every movement of the rudder, throttle, and remaining control surfaces interacted with damaged aerodynamics in ways impossible to replicate under standard training conditions, demanding split-second intuition. He discovered that subtle shifts in weight, minor throttle adjustments, and rudder coordination could manipulate lift asymmetry caused by the jammed aileron, effectively allowing controlled turns and altitude corrections under conditions previously labeled impossible. No pilot had ever attempted such a maneuver intentionally, and certainly none would be taught officially, as it defied conventional doctrines of safe operation under combat damage. The realization came gradually as he felt the air flow over the wings differently, responding to his inputs with nuanced sensitivity, as if the aircraft itself guided him toward equilibrium despite catastrophic impairment. It was a marriage of human understanding and mechanical feedback, each influencing the other in a dynamic negotiation between control and chaos. Adair's mind cataloged each minor reaction with precision, noting how incremental rudder corrections countered asymmetric drag, and how throttle variations adjusted pitch during high-stress maneuvers, a system entirely unrecognized by formal instruction. This was improvisation elevated into technique, a fragile but effective adaptation to extreme conditions. He understood that teaching such methods would be considered reckless, because any misapplication could rapidly convert controlled flight into disaster. Yet in the moment, no alternative existed. Immediate application of these improvised techniques determined not only survival, but also the defense of the vulnerable airfield below, and countless lives depended on success. The aircraft's response confirmed his deductions repeatedly, every minor adjustment eliciting predictable results, reinforcing his confidence that damaged planes could behave with unexpected stability if pilots understood subtle aerodynamic principles. It was an insight grounded in physics and intuition rather than doctrine, a breakthrough forged in the furnace of life-threatening combat. Adair recognized the larger implications. Flight manuals could not capture the realities of battle damage in real time, and theoretical limitations often proved irrelevant when a pilot combined experience, observation, and mental agility under pressure. Survival required creativity as much as technical knowledge and courage to act decisively. In subsequent moments, the technique allowed him to maintain altitude and vector toward the intended emergency landing site, bridging the gap between catastrophic damage and controlled recovery, a feat that would astound both ground personnel and future historians studying this engagement. The improvisation demonstrated that understanding fundamental aerodynamics offered far more flexibility than rigid adherence to training suggested, and that a single pilot, confronting overwhelming odds, could exploit these principles to influence both personal and strategic outcomes dramatically. By the time Adair approached the airfield, he had effectively invented a method of flight that would never be formally documented. A combination of knowledge, intuition, and daring that transformed imminent disaster into controlled opportunity, leaving observers and later historians alike in disbelief at what one man had accomplished in those extraordinary minutes. After stabilizing Lulu Belle from the fatal dive, Philip Adair faced the daunting reality of a 43-mile journey across dense Assam jungle toward the emergency landing site at Nagaguli. Every mile tested both the aircraft's battered structure and the pilot's endurance, as he balanced delicate control inputs against shifting wind and damaged flight systems. The right aileron remained jammed, and control cables had suffered severe compromise, leaving only subtle rudder and throttle adjustments capable of influencing trajectory, demanding constant mental calculation and precise timing for survival. Each movement had consequences, as excessive rudder or throttle change could induce roll or pitch instability, potentially turning controlled flight into catastrophic spin. Below, rivers snaked through dense forests, reflecting sunlight that glinted off water while obscuring hazards among the canopy, forcing Adair to remain hyper-aware of altitude, airspeed, and landing vectors simultaneously, despite extreme fatigue and physical strain. Every second represented a balance between improvisation and survival, with no margin for error across the unforgiving landscape. Tracer fire from earlier engagements still lingered in memory as psychological pressure compounded physical challenges, yet he maintained disciplined focus, translating combat stress into heightened awareness rather than panic, a rare combination developed through countless sorties over hostile territory. The mental calculus required for such navigation exceeded conventional instruction manuals, relying on adaptive reasoning in real time. Aircraft systems groaned under the continuous strain, with wings flexing unnaturally and instruments vibrating sporadically. Yet Lulu Belle responded predictably to minute adjustments, a testament to Adair's understanding of residual aerodynamic functionality, which he exploited to maintain a controlled flight path toward Nagaguli. The horizon stretched interminably, forests, ridges, and scattered settlements appearing in glimpses, as he adjusted throttle and rudder to account for crosswinds, turbulent thermals, and shifting air density, maintaining forward motion while compensating for impaired stability in a delicate equilibrium of physics and instinct. Every mile brought closer proximity to the airfield, yet danger remained. Japanese fighters could return, and structural failure of the aircraft remained imminent, creating a tension where courage, knowledge, and improvisation dictated the difference between survival and death. He maintained a rhythm, breathing steadily, eyes scanning both instruments and environment, muscles responding instinctively to maintain aircraft balance across extended flight. Adair's mind recorded each response of the damaged Warhawk, logging subtle interactions between engine power, rudder deflection, and residual lift, synthesizing a real-time guide to controlling a severely impaired fighter under combat stress, knowledge impossible to formalize but critical in those extraordinary circumstances. The flight demanded an extraordinary combination of endurance, technical understanding, and mental agility, as the 43 miles felt like an interminable trial, each second weighted with strategic consequence, because the survival of Dinjan Airfield and the Hump Airlift depended on successful navigation despite overwhelming odds. As Nagaguli emerged on the horizon, a relief mixed with tension flooded Adair's consciousness. The journey had tested every skill, instinct, and lesson learned, transforming improvised techniques into a coherent, life-saving strategy, and exemplifying the extraordinary capabilities of a pilot confronting impossible challenges in one of World War II's most harrowing engagements. As Philip Adair guided Lulu Belle closer to Nagaguli Airfield, ground crews caught sight of the damaged fighter approaching rapidly, its wings trembling under stress, smoke trailing from punctured panels. Their instincts immediately triggered alarms, as Japanese aircraft had frequently executed surprise raids in the region, creating a tense, split-second need for defensive action. Soldiers and mechanics scrambled to anti-aircraft positions, fingers hovering on triggers, eyes scanning for identifying markings while engines roared, and flak guns prepared to intercept what they assumed could be a hostile intruder. The sight of a lone P-40 descending erratically through the sky triggered a mixture of fear, confusion, and combat-conditioned reflex. Adair's aircraft appeared unusual, damaged, and unpredictable in trajectory, causing momentary hesitation among personnel trained to respond quickly to threats from the air. Every second became critical, as misidentification could result in friendly fire disaster, yet delay could allow the fighter to overshoot or crash uncontrolled into the airfield perimeter. Smoke from Lulu Belle's punctured fuel lines and distorted metal panels enhanced the illusion of a hostile aircraft, the combination of damaged fuselage and erratic movement creating a visual impression unlike any standard U.S. fighter, causing adrenaline to surge among ground crews while weapons remained primed. Adair maintained steady composure, adjusting rudder and throttle to compensate for asymmetric lift, simultaneously aware that any abrupt movements or miscalculations could provoke anti-aircraft fire, risking catastrophic destruction of both pilot and aircraft in the final moments of flight. Mechanics shouted identification calls, scanning the fuselage for national markings, as the Warhawk's engine note and flight patterns slowly registered as friendly, though skepticism persisted due to the unusual trajectory and evident damage. Each heartbeat stretched into tense seconds, as personnel hesitated to fire yet prepared for the worst. The airfield commander signaled to hold fire, a decision requiring rapid judgment and understanding that even small errors could escalate into disaster, emphasizing the razor-thin margin between caution and catastrophe in the chaos of combat zones. This instant highlighted the importance of discipline under pressure, even when instincts screamed for defensive action. Adair's approach, though perilous, allowed him to communicate his intent through controlled maneuvers, banking slightly and reducing descent speed as much as the crippled aircraft permitted, subtly signaling a friendly presence without compromising forward motion toward the runway. Finally, recognition came as the P-40's star insignia became visible, and crew members realized the approaching Warhawk was indeed one of their own, flown by the lone pilot who had previously engaged the overwhelming Japanese armada, transforming initial fear into astonished relief. Ground crews collectively lowered their weapons, a mixture of awe and disbelief washing over them as Adair executed a controlled landing, demonstrating unparalleled skill and courage, while the near-catastrophic misidentification underscored the extraordinary circumstances faced during this historic flight across Assam skies. Once Lulu Belle touched down at Nagaguli, the enormity of Philip Adair's achievement became immediately evident, as ground crews rushed forward to secure the Warhawk while processing the extensive battle damage. Smoke, torn metal, and bullet holes testified to the intensity of the engagement, leaving observers in stunned silence at what one pilot had survived and accomplished alone. Adair climbed from the cockpit, fatigued, bloodied, yet fully aware that his actions had preserved critical Allied assets, including 14 C-47 transports, vital to sustaining the Hump airlift supplying China with essential military and logistical support. The success of these operations depended entirely on functional airfields, and without his intervention, supplies would have been delayed or destroyed. Mechanics and fellow pilots surrounded him, inspecting both aircraft and pilot with equal amazement, noting that no procedural training could have prepared anyone to maintain control of a P-40 under such catastrophic damage. Each punctured fuselage panel and mangled control cable represented a near-impossible feat of survival, and the realization spread quickly that his improvisation had prevented a disaster of strategic magnitude. Commanders quickly assessed the broader implications, understanding that without Adair's extraordinary improvisation, Japanese bombers could have devastated runways, destroyed transports, and temporarily halted the Hump airlift, severely impacting Allied supply chains and military operations across China-Burma-India theaters. His courage directly influenced the operational continuity of entire campaigns. Medical personnel attended to minor injuries sustained during the engagement, while engineers and ground crews began documenting damage, though recognizing that formal manuals could never truly capture the nuances of Adair's technique for flying with severe controls. His improvisation was an unrepeatable convergence of skill, experience, and instinct under combat stress, impossible to formalize. Pilots who had witnessed the earlier engagement debriefed commanders, recounting the staggering odds faced by Adair, one P-40 against 64 enemy aircraft, navigating both mechanical failure and enemy fire with extraordinary precision, disrupting the Japanese bombing run and saving crucial assets. Their accounts emphasized how individual initiative could decisively affect operational outcomes. Word of the feat traveled quickly throughout Dinjan, boosting morale for soldiers, airmen, and support personnel who understood the precariousness of supply lines and airfield defense in remote, contested regions of Assam. Adair's performance became a symbol of audacity, technical mastery, and the human capacity to confront overwhelming danger with reason and courage. The 14 transports remained intact, able to continue missions to China without interruption, while the airfield remained operational, illustrating the strategic consequences of one pilot's determination to defy convention and exploit his understanding of damaged aircraft behavior. His actions demonstrated that individual skill could alter the course of complex operations in critical moments. Commanders later reviewed engagement reports, noting that traditional doctrines would have required immediate bailout under such conditions. Yet Adair's successful landing highlighted the limitations of rigid procedural thinking when confronted with unprecedented emergencies. Adaptation, improvisation, and rapid problem-solving had been the keys to survival and mission success. As the immediate crisis ended, Adair quietly absorbed the relief, aware that the Hump Airlift, Dinjan Airfield, and countless personnel owed their continued operation to his decisive action, leaving an indelible mark on both tactical history and the broader strategic efforts of the Allied campaign in Southeast Asia. Philip Adair's extraordinary flight that day in Assam left a legacy far beyond the visible damage to Lulu Belle or the immediate preservation of 14 C-47 transports, illustrating the profound impact of courage combined with improvisational skill under extreme pressure. His actions transcended standard procedures, demonstrating that survival and mission success sometimes depended on intuition and deep understanding of aerodynamics, rather than strict adherence to manuals. Historians later noted that Adair's unorthodox techniques, never officially documented, became a legendary example among fighter pilots of World War II, emphasizing how individual ingenuity could redefine practical boundaries of combat aviation and influence broader operational outcomes in critical theaters. His maneuvers challenged every preconception about what was possible with damaged aircraft under life-threatening conditions. Within the airfield, personnel who witnessed his return described the scene with awe, recalling the trembling fuselage, smoke-streaked canopy, and the sheer improbability of one man guiding a crippled P-40 across 43 miles of hostile airspace, surviving 16 direct hits while maintaining strategic initiative against overwhelming odds. This eyewitness testimony reinforced his reputation for technical mastery and personal bravery. Adair's story, though scarcely formalized in military manuals, became part of oral tradition among aircrews stationed in Assam, Burma, and India, inspiring a generation of pilots to trust instincts, adapt dynamically under pressure, and prioritize creative problem-solving when confronting scenarios that defied training or conventional expectations. His subsequent career, comprising 139 combat missions and ace status, reflected the skill and judgment first displayed during that solitary engagement. Colleagues recognized that the combination of courage, technical understanding, and rapid decision-making in extreme circumstances underpinned not only survival, but also strategic effectiveness, a principle rarely captured in formal doctrine yet vital to aerial warfare. Adair retired as a colonel in 1971, leaving behind a record of service that included more than personal accolades. It represented the broader human capacity to innovate under stress, to defy expectations when lives and critical operations hung in the balance, and to turn near-certain disaster into tactical victory. The flight itself remained largely undocumented in official reports, precisely because the methods used were deemed too unconventional for standardized instruction, yet its effects were undeniable, preserving lives, airfield functionality, and supply continuity for Allied operations over the Hump, contributing indirectly to the broader outcome of the war in Southeast Asia. Today, the story of Lulu Belle and the lone pilot who faced 64 enemy aircraft stands as a testament to the interplay of skill, courage, and improvisation, illustrating that history often relies on unrecorded acts of ingenuity as much as on formal strategy and doctrine, with lessons enduring for generations of aviators. Adair's legacy demonstrates that true mastery in combat is measured not only by survival or destruction of the enemy, but by understanding limitations, exploiting possibilities, and applying knowledge creatively when conventional methods fail under extreme conditions. Ultimately, the episode highlights the human dimension of warfare, where individual initiative, courage, and technical insight intersect to influence broader historical events, leaving a story of heroism, intellect, and improvisation that continues to inspire both military historians and aspiring pilots decades after the guns fell silent over Assam.